Welcome to From the Mind of Christine McConnell. So you've seen the finished room, and now we're going to focus on what were some of the finishing projects that ultimately just pulled everything together. So what I'm going to do now is dye some corded picture wire. And this is something that just really sells a space as looking old and Victorian. And you can still buy this stuff, so I will leave a link to it just below. I picked this up from the House of Antique Hardware online, and I picked it up before I realized they sold it in multiple colors. So for that reason, I'm going to be dyeing this like a deep chocolate brown, but just for future reference, they do sell it in that color. Once it had achieved just the right shade, I then dipped it in a bath of cold water, got it clean, and then began the process of just hanging it up to dry out. At the same time that I picked up that chair that we reupholstered for the vanity from that antique warehouse in Hudson, New York, I also picked up this beautiful old mirror. I knew it was really dirty, but when I got home and kind of took a closer look at it, it was just completely filthy. So I'm just going to make an initial pass on it, and then once it's actually hanging up, I'll do an even more thorough job of getting it sparkly. I'll add one more thing here, and that is I really like aged mirrors. So mirrors with spots and little bits of damage don't bother me. But if you are somebody who happens to really like a perfectly clear reflection in a mirror, you can always just replace the mirror and enjoy the frame. To affix a braided cord to your either mirror or picture, make sure that there are two very secure eye screws on either side. Loop the braided cord through that, twist it around, and honestly just make sure that it's very, very secure. There's a wire inside here, which makes it a little easier, but you definitely want to make sure that it's very secure because at no point would you want this to release. Wooden picture rail is something you can actually buy online if you're interested, and it really makes a space look authentically 1800s. So you can check that out if you're interested, and it's not terribly difficult to install. Mounting is the easiest part of this process because all you have to do is take that little hook and slip it over the front of the molding. All right, that's hung, and now we need to hang some lights. And there are several walls in this room that are lath and plaster just over brick, which means we need a different kind of fastener for the wall in order for it to be really secure. The way that I'm going about doing this is first I want to find the right placement for my lamp, and then once I'm happy with that, I'm just going to mark out that area, and then I'm going to take a pre-drill and screw into that, and this is going to be kind of a thicker pre-drill, and the reason for that is because you're going to be inserting one of these anchors, and then this is the thing that is going to hold your screw in place. I'm going to be honest with you and make a little bit of a confession. There have been times where I've just felt lazy and I've just taken a drill and I've just screwed a plain drywall screw straight into the plaster. And I've always regretted it because often the plaster will bubble up around it and it's never really as secure as going this route. So while this is a few more steps and it's a little more tedious, it's really well worth the trouble. I had two antique rose reading lights that I wanted to affix inside the canopy bed. And the way I'm going to go about doing this is I'm just going to pre-drill, and then I'm going to take something called a bend hook and just insert it right into there, twist it around. And the way this fixture works is it really just hooks directly onto this. I tried a couple different lamps right here in this area, and the second I set this cron owl light right there and turned it on, it was like, oh my gosh, why was I trying anything else? It was so perfect. So now we're going to install a beautiful old Victorian clock, and there's a couple little tips I can give you when you move any kind of clock from one place to another. And that is always take out the pendulum if you're going to move something like this. And then if you can, remove the movement from the case. And this protects both of those pieces and then also just makes the case lighter and easier to install. This clock is a lot heavier than the lights that we just affixed over by the sink. And so for that reason, I'm actually going to use a much larger anchor. And this is just going to obviously ensure that this is as stable as possible. Something else that's really critical when you're hanging a clock is always make sure it's level, because most of these clocks are weight-based, and if it's not level, it's just not going to keep running. I can now put the movement back in the case. Once I've done that, I can put the pendulum back where it goes, and then this should be ready to go. Nearly all of the light fixtures that I put around the room were antiques, and so that meant that each of them kind of had their own unique sort of mounting requirement. And so I didn't have a mount for this beautiful candelabra that I wanted to put on either side of the vanity. And so the captive had the idea to use these window sash hangers, and they were just absolutely the perfect thing for this job. Okay, all of my main pieces are hung, and now we're going to fluff up this room a little bit by adding some artificial plants. I love the website Nearly Natural for artificial plants just because they have such a big variety. The only caveat is when they do show up, you do need to fluff them out and sort of shape them into a silhouette that you're happy with. I found these really great plaster urns on Amazon, and what is so terrific about them is when they showed up, they look like metal and they look like a legitimate antique, which is terrific. The only drawback is the palm that I wanted to squeeze into them. The opening was just a little bit too small, so I attempted to shave down the side of this palm, and it didn't work because the base of these things underneath that foam is actually cement. So once I realized that wasn't going to work, I got my hammer out and I just started breaking it apart. Once that was done, I took all of those foam chunks and bits of cement and put them into this urn. And then from there, squeezed in the palm, and it completely held. And in addition to holding, it was now weighted, so it wasn't just going to topple over. After I had finished sort of cramming every little bit of that styrofoam into this urn just to fill it out completely, I then took some dried out Spanish moss and just fluffed out the top to give it kind of an organic green appearance. Okay, so that worked, but it made a huge mess all over the floor. And so the captive had an idea to take some of the plastic bags that these plants came in, wrap the bottom, and then from there sort of do all this bashing. And it completely worked and minimized the disaster by quite a bit. So if you tackle this, make sure you do that step. I have a bit of an obsession with pairs of things, and I don't know why this is, but I just happen to really love anything in a set of two. So if you start looking around my house and how I decorate, there's often always two of anything that I like. The two types of plants that I most strongly associate with the Victorian era are palms and ferns. And so one of these artificial Boston ferns really needs to be shaped. And honestly, it takes a bit of time to get it to really kind of start looking natural. One of my very favorite hobbies is doing artificial floral arranging, and this room needed a few to kind of give it that almost Titanic-esque sort of feel. And so I found these beautiful vases on a website called A Touch of Class, and the opening for them is very tiny. So what I normally do with arrangements is I always take a blade and I just cut off any excess bulk. And what this does is it just allows you to get a whole bunch into very small spaces. I shift the order in which I start around quite a bit, but on average, I usually like to start with the greens. I try to make everything as kind of loose and delicate as possible. And then once I feel like I've got a really good shape, then I start adding in little pops of color and lightness, usually with the smallest pieces first, and then I start working into kind of larger flowers. I wanted a really beautiful central floral arrangement for the mantle, and then two little pairs on either sides of the nightstands. And so for that reason, I'm going to be making these smaller arrangements. And again, with these, I do try to keep them as piecey and delicate as possible. And I always like to start with the green. Something that I just absolutely love about all of these kinds of little hobbies that I get into is you're constantly learning and kind of figuring out new things that work and things that don't. And something I've discovered with floral arrangements, especially smaller ones, is it's so great to use a combination of sort of bigger pieces, then medium sized pieces, and then really, really teeny pieces. And I'm talking about like the florals. And it just kind of breaks it up, and I feel like it gives it a really delicate, elegant look. Once I think I'm getting really close to done, I like to put it in the place that it's going to be resting. And then from there, I actually start adjusting it, making sure that it kind of looks really organic and fits right at home wherever you've placed it. One of the last things I'm going to do here is make some drapes for this little entrance to the closet and powder room. Ultimately, I will be making over that closet and the powder room, but I don't have time to do that yet, and they're a little bit dated in a bad way. And so I'm going to just make some drapes to kind of cover things up and keep this Victorian continuity going all around the room. Trying to get anything done with this goofy little hamburger in the room is almost impossible. He's somehow even a worse sewing assistant than Professor Poof, and I think he missed his true calling of being a circus performer. In an early episode, I did some drapes for one of the rooms downstairs, and luckily I made a pattern for how I did those, and it's really just virtually the same thing that I'm doing here for this little doorway into the closet. And so I just pulled out that pattern and was able to use it, and it worked perfectly. The first panels to go up are what I would call the blackout drapes, and you can use these to actually completely visually block off the area or pull them back if you want to easily be able to pass through them. From there, I just needed to make the side valances, and again, I had a pattern that I created for these, and it kind of looks like a slice of pizza with one straight side. If I'm being honest here, I'm kind of winging it, which you really can do with anything that's like this, because once it's gathered up, how straight that line is or what the measurement is exactly isn't really going to matter all that much, just so long as it's got some fringe on it and it looks kind of gothic and pretty. It's now time to make that last piece that I need, which is the top center valance. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to use my old pattern. But if you want to know how to get this measurement right for your opening, just measure whatever the width of your doorway is and then double it. And then that is going to be that bottom line measurement. And then you just go up from there. Now I can just attach some fringe, get it on the rod, and work it into place. You don't really see these bows on the finished bed, but I bought this beautiful ribbon from this antique place in New York, and I've been dying to use it for something, so I'm just gonna make a couple little chocolate bows and then pin them up on the front poles of the bed. I really love the atmospheric effect that real oil lamps have in a room. So I'm using an oil here. It's just paraffin oil that I picked up on Amazon. And it's really great. It's unscented. I fill it up to about, I want to say like 80% of that. And then I switch over to something called Maison Berger. And the fragrance I really like is Vanilla Gourmet. What I love about doing this so much is it very lightly adds like a fragrance to the room without in any way being overpowering. To ensure that the oil has traveled all the way up to the top, I like to dip the wick directly into the oil, and then I pull it up through the mechanism, and then it's just ready to light. So real fire means real responsibility, which means I need to have a functioning non-expired fire extinguisher directly by the door, kind of hidden a little bit, but still visually, like you can easily spot it, because you just don't want to have to root around to grab it in an emergency. The last big tip I'm going to give you is take your time with decorating. I personally walk kind of a fine line between areas looking cozy versus cluttered. And so what I find really is helpful is I put everything where I think I want them to go. I photograph it, and then I just sort of look at that picture for like an evening or something like that. And then I go back in and I start pulling the things that I feel like are too much, adding a few other things. And ultimately this just sort of assists me in making sure that everything I'm working on has like a nice harmony to it. So just keep that in mind and take your time. The room is completely done and we are ready to start having guests stay in it, which is so exciting because this thing just took forever to do. There are still more projects coming of things that I did in this room that have not even been covered yet. So look forward to seeing those. And until then, take care of yourselves and I'll see you again very soon.